Welcome back to American Racing Snobs. Do you have the Formula One summer break blues? Well, we've got the cure with a familiar voice joining us today. Our guest is a 20-year veteran of and a podium finisher at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. He's got 7 Formula One starts, an Indy 500 top 5 finish, as well as starts in the Daytona 500 and the Bathurst 1000. You know him as a beloved broadcaster for CBS, ESPN, Speed Channel, and NBC Sports. And now he is the author of the book Hobbo, Motor Racer, Motor Mouth. Welcome to the show, David Hobbs.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. I was beginning to wonder who you were talking about. I thought this book sounds pretty good.
Now, I just finished up your book. One of your old teammates, John Andretti, once told me that he remembers every race he ever lost. It looks like you remember every race you were ever in. This book is so detailed. How much research did you have to do, and were there things that you had forgotten about completely when you were writing this book?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So, as you can see, the co-author is Andrew Marriott. Actually, I've had 2 co-authors, really. I started to do the book, 15 years ago with Bob Varsha, who most people remember as my co-broadcaster for nearly 20 years on ESPN and, of course, Speed Channel and Speed. And when I sat down to write the book, which I'd been urged to do multiple times by Mrs. Hobbs, Mags, you talk about writer's block. I looked at the sheet of paper and I thought, I have no idea what to write. So I've always, had a bit of I've had the gift of the gab. So what we did was I recorded it all. And I just started off at the beginning, recording, with Bob, stuff I knew, and then Bob was transcribed it. Well, after about 3 years, I left Fox. So Bob and I concerned, this isn't going how we hoped it would. So I joined with Andrew Marriott, who I've known actually since I was about 19. When I started racing in Mum's Morris, Oxford, Andrew had just about to leave college and was a cub reporter on a magazine in England called Motoring News. It was a bit like Speed Sport News. It was a newspaper, not a magazine, and it was weekly. And he was a cub reporter for them, so I've known Andrew basically since I started racing. And he is very good on stats. So we recorded hours and hours and hours of tape, which he then transcribed and edited down. And the more you talk, the more you remember. And then he would remember stuff that I'd completely forgotten about. He'd say, well, what about that race you had at Alton Park or at Monza or somewhere? And I said, oh, correct, I've forgotten all about that. Yeah, what happened? He said, well, you came fourth. I said, oh, did I? And he has got a really good memory. So, we worked on it together for about 3 or 4 years. Then it went to the publishers, which is Evro, owned by Eric Verdon Rowe in Britain. Eric Verdon Rowe used to own Haymarket Press, which, among other magazines, has Autosport and Motorsport, which he then sold, and started his own publishing company, Evro. And he has a fantastic editor, a chap called Mark Hughes. And then Mark finally edited down all the scripts that Andrew had given him. By this time, I had learned how to use Word. So I was getting these chapters by chapter from Mark. And then, when again I saw it all written out, that reminded me of so many little side issues and stuff like that. And, oh, crikey, I remember that. So I sort of re-edited the whole thing again and managed to add about 10,000 words. So in the end, it's been a bit of a long-winded process, and it involved me, Bob Varsha, Andrew Marriott, Mark Hughes, and of course Mrs. Hobbs, who wrote her chapter, which Mark Hughes, when he read it first, he said, "This is the best chapter in the book."
And that's why you saved it for last, right?
I didn't tell her that. But anyway, and I had a lot of pictures.
A lot of pictures. The photos might be the best part of the book. The writing's fantastic and the stories are great, but every single story has multiple photos of practically every car you've ever driven, and it's full of all these wild Hobbs-like stories. I want you to give an example from, someone who may be on the fence of getting this book. Can you tell us the underwear story from Kailami? Just a taste of what we'll find in this book.
Well, yeah. I mean, I did the Kailami 9 Hour with Jackie Ickx in 1968. And Ickx had broken his ankle in the U.S. Grand Prix about 6 weeks before we went to Kailami. Kailami is always held on the first weekend in November. And we were driving a Ford GT40. Well, actually, we were driving a Mirage, which is based on the Ford GT40. And those cars had those great big, fabulous-looking filler caps with a great big sort of click top. And it was right in front of the A-pillar, just in front of the driver. So we're having a driver. Yeah, we didn't have a driver change because I just sat in while they refueled it. Well, unfortunately, quite a lot of fuel flowed. They fill it with, like NASCAR, they with cans. Anyway, quite a bit leaked out, and it leaked into the car and onto the seat. Now, I happen to be wearing Marks and Spencer's is a big retailer in England, a bit like Sears or J.C. Penney over here. Obviously better, but I mean it's a big retailer. And all the fad in the mid '60s there was for string vests and string underpants.
Trying to save weight anywhere you could for the race, right?
Well, exactly. Yes. I'm sitting there in these string underpants. And of course, the fuel leaked in onto the seat through my uniform, my fireproof uniform. And I suppose that's the difference between drivers then and drivers today. I mean, today I would have leapt out of the car and insisted on changing the uniform and all that stuff, But anyway, it burnt the soft skin of my rear end. I mean, that fuel just absolutely... And of course, I'm doing, about an hour stint, which was what those cars would do on a load of fuel. And so when we did do the driver change, and I ripped all my suit off and my underwear, and got it stung for ages. And I had the crisscross. It looked like a noughts and crosses board on my rear end for about 4 months. And this bloody string underwear had burnt this crisscross into my backside. So yeah, that was one of our stories from Kailami. So, and all that came back to me when I'm talking about it. And in fact, Jackie and I went on to win the race, so which was pretty satisfying. In those days, racing was so much more casual than today. And the Kailami 9 Hour was always run on Saturday. And on Sunday, we used to go to the clerk of the course, what you'd call the race director, had a fabulous ranch house, owned quite a lot of land and a big farm, not very far from the track, like 3 or 4 miles. And he used to put on a big party there on Sunday afternoon. And we had the prize giving there, and obviously a lot of drink was flowing and a lot of food. And because we all toggled off to this party, I couldn't sit down much of the time. I had to stand up most of the party. But those are the sort of things that happen. I mean, today, race will be over. Okay, see you guys.
Get on the jet.
Get on the jet. Bugger off to England or wherever you're going, and you'll never see anybody again until first practice, the next race. But in those days, it was a much, much more social affair. And the South Africans in those days were extremely social. And it was a lot of fun to go to South Africa, in spite of course, what we all found when we were there, that lots of things weren't so good. So, so that's the sort of thing I remembered. And I remember, I'm not sure it's in the book or not, I did a race with Mike Hailwood 2 years earlier than that in South Africa. We went all through South Africa, went to what was then Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. Went to Portuguese East Africa, which is now Mozambique. And we raced in the beach town of Lorenzo Marques in the GT40. And our mechanic, who was a bit of a bozo, those lift-type jacks where you just a quick lever, so you lift up the front of the car, change the wheels, and drop it down. Well, this dork had lifted the front up. Then he just casually walks down to the back of another one and lifts the back up. Well, because as soon as he lifted the back up, the front one leapt straight out up in the air and went right through the windscreen. And this is all about 20 minutes before the race. Obviously, you should have got somebody else to stand on the front jack, which is what you do in situations where you can jack up both ends of the car with that sort of jack. So we did the race with no windscreen. And then in the race, it started to rain. And I came in from my pit stop to change with Mike Hayward, who was a hell of a card, absolutely a fabulous bloke, 10-time world champion on motorbikes, multiple winner in the Isle of Man TT, the most dangerous race in the world. And he's sitting in the back of the pits reading his book. And his street clothes. He said, "Oh, no, dear boy, I couldn't possibly deprive you of racing in the rain with no windshield. You carry on." So I did. What else could you do? So lots of stories like that, yeah.
The book is packed with them, and you race in an era that is often romanticized, and I think everyone's well aware of how dangerous racing was back then. But one thing that struck me when I was reading your book was just how mechanically unreliable these machines were, and you just don't see that in racing anymore now, do you? It seems like 2/3 of the races you were ever in could be described as, well, we were doing this until insert part failure here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my day, apart from the fact that it was extremely dangerous, and why we all ignored it, I don't know, but we did. But reliability, I mean, today you go into every race thinking I'm going to win it. And you never really think about retiring with a technical issue. In those days, you went into every race thinking, well, if I finish, I've got a good chance of winning it. Because everything used to break all the time, especially gearboxes, drive shafts, universal joints, and, of course, engines. We're always dropping valves, burning pistons. I mean, the modern car, you look at it as you're a young guy, so you've only ever been around. I mean, I look at these NASCAR cars. When I drove a NASCAR car, well, the first time I drove a NASCAR was at the practice for the Daytona 500 in 1962, long before you were even thought about. And I drove a Holman & Moody car in practice, as did Jimmy Clark. And I mean, the rev limit on this thing was a Ford Galaxy. The rev limit on this thing was about 5,000 RPM. Now, and of course, they used to brake a lot then. Now, those NASCAR machines, I mean, they do 500 miles at 8,000 RPM the whole way. I mean, engine speed that was absolutely unheard of. But the metallurgy is such that the crankshafts, the conrods, the bolts, the bearing, the lubrication systems are all so improved that these things are bulletproof. Formula One, the 21 race series, you've only got 3 engines and 2 gearboxes for the whole series. That's it. And if you change it, put an extra one in, you get a 10-spot grid penalty and all sorts of gruesome penalties. So they are unbelievably reliable.
Well, I think you get fewer upset winners because of that, because in your era, a gearbox or an engine was built to last one race. So there was, a chance every race that it was going to fail. But now if they're supposed to last 7 races, you've taken your odds of having a part failure. If it's supposed to last 7, it's definitely going to make it through 6 unless there's something mechanically wrong with it.
Well, that seems to be the case. I mean, Jimmy Clark lost the world championship with 3 laps to go.
Is that Mexico?
Yeah. When an oil pipe, well, actually, it was a plug, an oil plug in the end of a gallery in the block fell out, and he fell out. In Monza in 1963, he was leading by miles. Had a puncture, which is also pretty rare these days. Went to the back, went to the lead again, and then it blew up. So, I mean, gearboxes broke a lot in those days, but they were only 4 or 5 speeds. I mean, when the 5-speed boxes came on, we thought we'd sort of gone to heaven with 5 speeds. Now, of course, they're all 7 and 8. I mean, you got 8-speed production cars now. So, reliability has changed a lot. And, of course, things like hubs and uprights and wheel bearings and wheels failed a lot. As I say, to me, that's normal. to you, you're just not used to people blowing up. It just doesn't happen anymore. It's just really, to me, it's pretty weird.
Well, you had to go through just a shocking range of emotions just reading your book at all the races that you thought you had, and then something happened and just snatched it away from you. And also there's the safety aspect of it, of having the confidence to just sail into a corner, braking from 200 miles per hour, just hoping that all the wheels stay on it. And, the safety factor has been discussed ad nauseum, but then there's the added danger that they did for show at Le Mans with the Le Mans start, with drivers running across the active pit lane and jumping in. And you were there when Jackie Ickx famously protested and just walked to his car. He ended up winning the race. Those starts looked so dangerous, but what was it like from the driver's seat once you finally got there? What were you doing with the belts?
Well, of course, I liked them. Of course, for the first, it wasn't until about 1960, the mid-60s, that we had any belts in Europe. So belts weren't an issue. You just jumped in and off. I used to love those Le Mans starts, and I used to be pretty good at them. But then, of course, when the belts came in, then we used to do all sorts of tricks, like hang up the belt, the left belt from the roof of the car with a bit of duct tape, and the right belt where you got in on the right-hand side of the car, because these were all right-hand drive cars, not left-hand drive. And, of course, I was just explaining to somebody the other day, you'd make the start, you'd get your arm to the left link, and then you'd be scrabbling around trying to get your right arm to the other one. And meanwhile, you're accelerating up and changing through the gears, and you go through the Dunlop curve and then the S's and then Terroos. Now you'll be going down the straight. And you'll be getting up close to 200 miles an hour, and you're still fiddling around with your belt. Looking down, looking up, looking down, looking up, making sure you aren't going to run into something.
And the field's completely packed up because it's the start, so this is the most congested you're going to have in terms of traffic.
Yeah, there's lots of cars around, and they're all doing the same thing. They're all trying to put their belts on. So obviously they decided, hey, enough's enough. And after Jackie's protest in 1969, in 1970, the cars were all lined up in echelon like they used to be for the Le Mans start, but we were all sitting in them belted up. And then that was only for 1 year. Then in 71, they went to the first rolling start of Le Mans, and the Le Mans start per se completely disappeared. There's no such thing anymore.
That's interesting, because the McQueen film shows that one start where they're sitting there Le Mans style. I didn't realize that was just 1 year.
Yeah, it was only 1 year. Then they said, well, the heck with it, we'll just do a rolling start. They decided to do a standing start, but those cars all full of fuel, and 50 of them would be a bit dangerous, and it would be tough on the car, which is going to last 24 hours. Mind you, a Le Mans start was tough on the car. It's going to last 24 hours. I mean, you get in, stamp on the gas pedal, start the thing up, drop the clutch and hurtle off. Not exactly the best thing to do to an engine and transmission that's now going to last 24 hours. But
no wonder they all broke.
Jackie said, well, I did not walk all the way because towards the end, the people behind me, they are coming at me, so I did run the last few feet to get out the way of the traffic. And, of course, he went on to win the race.
That was a race that looked like you might have a chance at. One thing I want to touch, you came so close at Le Mans. It was heartbreaking. Is that the one that got away?
Well, it's one of three that got away. Three that were pretty much a dead cert. That one, we ended up being a lap ahead of Jackie at the end of lap one. Now, lap one being 8.5 miles, of course, at Le Mans, because halfway at the S's, at the old White House corner, a poor chap called John Wolfe, who was a British driver, and the first guy to drive a 917 in a race. Anyway, he crashed at White House and was killed and took out 2 or 3 other cars. And Jackie was behind that, so he got held up for a long time. So at the end of lap one, me and Mike Hayward were a lap ahead. And that's how it stayed for the next, 18 hours, 17 to 20 hours. But then in the night, my brakes completely failed. The pedal went to the floor going into the Mulsanne hairpin. The GT40 in those days was doing about 208 at the end of the straight. Put my foot on the brake, and the pedal just went to the floor. So I went down the escape road and did a U-E and drove back to the pits and said something's gone wrong with the brakes. And the team manager said, it's the pads. You need new pads. And I said, well, it may do. It's not the pads, it's something else. And he said, you just worry about the driving and we'll leave us the technical now. Anyway, in those days, changing the pads was a long-winded business. You've got to take all the bodywork off and the wheels. And, of course, you've got to push the pads back with a great big reverse plier thing that opens the pistons back up, put the pads in, which are all red hot, take the old ones out, put the new ones in, blah, 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 put the bodywork back. And, of course, I was sitting there in the car while they're doing all this. And when I got to the end of the pit straight, guess what? Pedal went straight to the floor, like I knew it would. So I did another slow lap, 8.5 miles. So they're still doing it. So then they go through the whole procedure again. And they found a very small hole in a brake pipe. In those days, the calipers had a pipe from one side of the caliper to the other. They weren't a fully integral caliper. And they had this little pipe that went across. And a wheel weight had clipped it and worn a hole in it. So they had to change the pipe, bleed the brakes, put all the bodywork back. Meanwhile, the other car is now ahead of us. And of course, we were still only running about fourth or fifth. But the quicker Porsches, the 908s, all, trashed out and one way and another. And suddenly it's down to Jackie Hicks and Hans Herman in the 908. And they had a tremendous duel for the last, half an hour. Excuse me. And Jackie emerged the winner. And we trailed in third. But, of course, all that fantastic dice for the win should have actually been for second. There it is. These things, it's all a long time ago. I used to get very aggrieved and very irritated and very frustrated at the time. But now I always thought I was a bit of an unlucky race driver with some of my results. But I look back on it all now and realise, in fact, that I was an incredibly lucky race driver, and I'm still here to talk about it and talk to you about it 40 years later.
I'd absolutely agree with that.
Half my compatriots were killed in Formula One, or any sort of racing in those days was dangerous as hell. So I suppose in the end I was actually turned out to be pretty lucky.
And not just in sports cars, also in Formula 5000, a series where you were a champion. I hadn't really known much about that series, but that was a single-seater series based in the U.S., and it sounds like those cars were more powerful than F1 and paid more, and also lured a bunch of the top talent. If some of our listeners may not be familiar with what Formula 5000 was back then, how would you describe that?
Well, Formula 5000 was basically like a Formula One car of the day. Little front stub wings and a bit of a wing out the back. But instead of having a Formula One 3-litre engine, they had a 5-litre, hence the 5,000cc, hence the 5,000. Stock block, American stock block. And Dodge had engines in there, and Ford and Chevrolet. The GM engines were probably the best. And as you say, it attracted a very wide field. And for, 5 or 6 years there, we had incredible racing with big fields. 30, 40 cars. Mario Andretti, Bobby Unser, Gordon Johncock, Brian Redman, myself, Graham McRae from New Zealand, a whole bunch of Australians. Frank Matic came over, myself, Vern Schuppen, who came third at Indy. A lot of top drivers, and they were very, very, very good racers. And I think the SCCA made a terrible mistake when they said that people won't watch open-wheel race cars on road courses. They want to have the bodywork like the old Can-Am cars had. So at the end of '76, you just use your Formula 5000 car and put a body on it to make it look like a center seat Can-Am car, and it ran for 3 or 4 years, 5 years maybe, but it was not a great success either. And then immediately after that, we had the champ cars, the kart, came along with people like Michael Andretti and Little Al. And we'd already had Mario Andretti and Big Al driving the Formula 5000. So now we had their two sons, plus a whole flotilla of other people, obviously, in champ car. And places like Mid-Ohio, Watkins Glen, Road America have never had bigger crowds than they had in those days. I mean, they're getting back to it now with the current IndyCar, which is a very successful formula. But I've always said that IndyCar, Formula 5000 car, could have been the IndyCar of the future because, again, with the reliability it's around now with the stop block, you could have gone to turbocharging if you'd wanted or supercharging, and they would have been massively fast cars and would have made a great IndyCar. But the powers that be didn't see it that way and dropped the whole thing, and I think it was a terrible mistake because it was a great formula. And people like Brian Redman, I mean, he lapped Watkins Glen faster than the Formula One cars did at the time. Peter Gethin won a combined Formula One, Formula 5000 race at Brands Hatch. So they were plenty fast enough.
You did me a huge favor at the end of this book with the lists that you put at the start of the appendix, some of your favorite things. You listed your 10 favorite race cars. I'll spoil that one for everyone. The Ford GT40 was number one. Yeah. You also listed your favorite tracks, and it looks like your top four are pretty much the same as mine, although I'm not a professional race driver, so your opinion holds a little bit more stock. With the Nürburgring Nordschleife as the number one ahead of Le Mans, Road America, Watkins Glen, all classic winding tracks. But I did want to ask you about another list that is not in this book, greatest drivers of all time. Who would you put at the top of your list? You can give me a top five or anything like that, but you've seen some of these guys from inside the cockpit, from the commentary booth. Who do you think was the greatest?
Well, boy, I mean, for my money, Jimmy Clark took some beating. He was just an absolute genius behind the wheel. Had an ability to make amazing starts. And, he's one of these first lap wonders. I mean, he'd come around, he'd be like, half a second quicker in practice than whoever was alongside him on the grid. And at the end of lap one, he'd come around 2 seconds in front. And of course, you didn't have tyre warmers or anything like that in those days. So Jimmy Clark is right up there, and he could drive anything. And of course, another guy who's absolutely right up there has got to be Mario Andretti. I mean, he was just quick in absolutely anything. I mean, he won the Daytona 500, much to everyone's absolute horror and disgust. He won the Indianapolis 500, and he won the World Championship. The only one of the big four that he didn't win was Le Mans, and he was a bit unlucky there. But, I mean, one week he'd be racing on the dirt in an offset chassis, front engine, old-style champ car. The next week he'd be at Spa in the Lotus, absolutely the most aerodynamic car of its day, on a fast, sweeping curves. So he had tremendous ability to drive just about anything. Obviously, you have to include in there Fangio. You have to include in there Michael Schumacher, or I didn't approve of some of his driving tactics. And I think, we're getting to the point now where you've got to start thinking about Lewis Hamilton pretty strongly. I mean, he's driving the best car, but all the best drivers drive the best cars. But he has an uncanny ability to win races. And obviously Sebastian Vettel would be high on that list. Then, you've got people like Jimmy Johnson. I mean, you don't win 5, NASCAR championships, Cup championships, without having huge driving skill. Jeff Gordon, another tremendous driver. So the list could go on. And then, of course, obviously, you have to look at the era of the racing, the cars, the safety. Would Lewis Hamilton have wanted to drive in the Belgian Grand Prix on the old Spa with absolutely zero safety to the track, driving a front-engine car with a tube frame made of a little bits of spindly tubing, 50-gallon gas tank right behind his head, and a race that lasted 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours? Would he have had the same drive then that he has now? So it's hard to compare from era to era, but those are some of the drivers. There's so many really, really top drivers. And obviously, Dale Earnhardt, I mean, there was a tough driver who could really drive anything. It's hard to tell in some ways now because everybody specializes. I mean, people like Dale Earnhardt really only ever did Winston Cup. or drove a cup car. And the IndyCar drivers now only drive IndyCars, with the odd foray into maybe a sports car, but generally they don't interchange like we did. And of course they don't have to, because in those days, you'd win a few bucks. So you had to drive as many cars as you possibly could to make a living out of it.
I don't think Alonso's hard up for cash, though. So he's kind of doing that throwback, but he's doing it for the fame, trying to do what Graham Hill did. Do you think Alonso can get that Triple Crown? Or is this Indy 500 going to prove to be the thorn in his side, not unlike your Brian Redman?
Well, it could easily be, because, to win the Indy 500, you not only need to be good, the team needs to be good, everything needs to be absolutely immaculate from start to finish, and, of course, you have to have a bit of luck. Johnny Rutherford, when I first met Johnny, we drove the McLarens together in 1974, and, he came from the back in his car, and I started off in about the third row, and he won it, and I came fifth. But that was his 16th start at Indy. So if Alonso has to make 16 starts before he wins, which he could easily have to do. So yeah, he could win Indy 500, I'm sure, easily enough. But will he? He's got to be a bit lucky to do it.
And he also seems to be plagued by some errant political moves, playing the politics game. And that's something that you talked about in your book, that you might regret not being either more political or, as you put it so succinctly, I wasn't enough of a prick sometimes to be successful, whether that's with the other drivers or with the mechanics on your team, about putting your foot down and getting something done that in your heart needs to happen. Looking at the current field of drivers, who's too nice to be successful?
Not many of them. Most of them are pricks. But you've got to be tough. You've got to be tough with your team. You've got to be tough with the other drivers. And obviously, Alonso is certainly not squeamish in any way, shape, or form. I just think that he's too much of a control freak. He obviously should never have left McLaren when he did in a huff in 2008. He should have stuck with that, but he just didn't like the fact that Hamilton was as quick as he was right out of the box as a rookie. Sometimes you have to put up with that sort of stuff, because there's always somebody that's going to be, you can't expect to be the quickest guy all the time and just get away with it, and somebody else won't come along. And, of course, Ricciardo made that mistake this year, going from Red Bull to Renault, and look at him. He's got 22 points. Verstappen's got 183 or something. And I think Alonso has made some terrible mistakes in where he's always jigged when he should have jogged. He's gone from this team to that team to the other team, and he should never have left Ferrari, having gone there in the first place. Now he was he was unlucky not to win the World Championship twice with Ferrari. So maybe Alonso is not necessarily the luckiest guy out there, and he's going to need to be to win, Indy, because he's only going to get 3 or 4 goes at it, and the team's going to have to be good. You have got to be a bit of a prick. You've got to really put your foot down and say, no, this is what it's going to be. I want that done to the car. And funnily enough, I heard from Will Buxton just the other day that, the Gene Haas cars are having which is the only American team in Formula One, and I wish them luck. Of course, when we were on NBC, we used to plug them a lot. They made a big change to the car for the Barcelona Spanish Grand Prix. And Roman Grosjean said, this new tack that we're doing, this new direction we're taking is not right. We need to go back to the old spec. And nobody took any notice. And as you've noticed, they qualified well, and as soon as the race starts, they just go right to the back. Because the way they have their chassis set up, and the tyres, they keep complaining about the tyres and saying it's the tyres' fault. Well, everybody's got the same tyres, so obviously it's not the tyres' fault. It's the car's fault because it doesn't use the tyres properly. And Roman Grosjean spotted this, and I know that he and Gunther Steiner don't exactly hit it off. But Roman, he tried to be a prick, and they were bigger pricks than he were, and they didn't do it. Now, apparently, they're suddenly coming around his way of thinking. The car picked up a bit of speed, and we'll have to see how it goes after the summer break. But, it's you got to be tough, and you got to have skin as thick as a rhino, really, to be successful.
What would you do if you were running Haas in terms of drivers? Because we know that they're not necessarily seeing eye to eye. Grosjean's reputation's got a bit of a black mark on it from past transgressions, and he's also didn't come off looking like the most deserving candidate in that Netflix series. But as you mentioned, he was the one trying to blow the whistle on that bad development tact. Which path would you choose if you were Gunter?
Well, I think I'd probably stick to who I've got. Magnussen, he's a tough cookie. I mean, I'm not absolutely in love with some of his driving tactics. Romain might be a bit too nice to be, because she obviously is a very loving father and husband. I don't know whether, in Formula One, I'm going to be a bit of a prick at home, which is why most of them get divorced. But and because I never did. But I think I'd stick with what I've got. The other thing is, you've got to look around a bit. Are people like Ricciardo or Nico Hulkenberg, are they going to want to go to Haas? I mean, the car has not shown really enough form yet. But then, of course, if you have no choice, if Renault say to Hulkenberg, you're out, then he might consider going to Haas. And if I was Haas, I would definitely consider Nico Hulkenberg as being one of the guys I would like to have in my car.
The linchpin of silly season, though, is Mercedes, Bottas or Ocon. One of those drivers may be on the market, maybe not fall down the grid as far as Haas is concerned to affect their driver market. But what do you do at Mercedes? Bottas or Ocon, if you're Toto Wolff now?
Well, I mean, Toto has always been very, very loyal to Bottas. But I have noticed in the last few weeks that he's been saying things like, well, I have to think about it long and hard during the summer break, which means that he is thinking about changing Bottas. And poor old Valtteri, that crash in Germany, a rather poor result in Hungary, whichever way you look at it, considering he was on the front row. I have a funny feeling. But, of course, it's a bit of a risk to put Ocon back in the car, who hasn't driven a car for 1 or 2 years now. But Will, who I saw the other day up at the Simeone collection, which, by the way, is just a fantastic place to go in Philadelphia, if you're ever there. I have a feeling that poor old Bottas might be out. And then that would be another good choice for Steiner at Haas, if he's thinking of making some changes. Bottas is he's a tremendous driver, really. Just not as good as Hamilton, but then not many people are out there.
And what's the price for harmony within Mercedes? Because we saw how Hamilton and Rosberg were pushing each other to new levels, but they were also taking it over the line sometimes, famously at Spain in 2016, when they both ended up in the gravel on the first lap, and Nico just driving straight into the side of him at Austria later that year. Would you keep Bottas just because him and Hamilton seem to have a synergy and a harmony that's going to be hard to duplicate, especially if Ocon has to prove himself right out of the gate?
Gosh, you should be a motor racing expert, Eric. That's absolutely, you've hit the nail right on the head. I think Toto Wolff is strong enough that he'll handle the dispute. If they get tough with each other and they start mucking around and ruining or getting in the way of his team, I think he's tough enough to handle it. And I think he'd rather have two drivers who are battling for the championship, and he'll handle the discontent or the discord. On the other hand, Bottas is still second in the championship, although Verstappen's getting horribly close. He's only 7.9 now. So it's a tough decision for Wolff. I don't know what I'd do, quite honestly. I thought Ocon was a tremendously deserving driver, and of course the really sad thing was he got pushed out by Lance Stroll, who probably is not as good as Ocon, whichever way you look at it. And I'd like to see Ocon in there in something, but I want to see him in something good. I don't want to just see him in Formula One for the sake of being in Formula One.
Were you surprised at the move yesterday by Red Bull swapping Albon and Gasly?
That's Dr. Marco. I wouldn't want to be working with him, I tell you that. Right? I wasn't. Pierre Gasly has been a big disappointment, frankly. I mean, you look at his points and Verstappen's points. I mean, he is just miles down. He's had probably one or two too many crashes. I mean, you don't expect these guys to crash. Look at Verstappen, a couple of years ago. You have to crash to learn the limit. But I thought he would do better than he has. And so can't say I am that surprised. And Albon certainly seems to be good, but of course he's just a rookie. To be thrown in the deep end with Max Verstappen, who's right on the top of his game at the moment and is relatively experienced now, with nearly 100 Grand Prix under his belt. I mean, it's going to be tough for Albon too, I think, very tough.
I got the impression they're just trying to figure out exactly what they have, because Albon's results aren't that different from Gasly's in the Toro Rosso last year. But if Gasly can't cut the mustard at Red Bull, do they want to let him finish the year only to find out that Albon's going to be the same next year? This kind of speeds up their decision-making by a year. But to me, I was disappointed that Horner said they were going to honor Gasly's contract. So you think that came from up on high with Dr. Marco?
Could have done. Although I think Christian carries a lot of weight in that Red Bull hierarchy, almost as much as Marco. He's not as quite as public as Marco, but I think that Christian's is a pretty heavyweight guy there. So they are honoring their contract and they are putting him in the Toro Rosso. The big thing is at the end of the year, what will he do with him then? It's going to be interesting to see how Gasly makes out against Kvyat. Now, I was a bit surprised to see Kvyat come back.
I think we all were.
I think that he had a good run. I thought it was a little bit fair to get rid of him when they did. But there's so many hot young kids out there at the moment that I don't think they really needed to bring back Kvyat, but he seems to be doing pretty well. Although the Toro Rosso performance has definitely wilted alongside the Red Bull, which is not that surprising. I mean, very few people build a car as good as Adrian Newey is. But it'll be interesting to see if Gasly doesn't wipe the floor with Kvyat. And I think that at the end of next year, at the end of the year, you might see Gasly out altogether.
So we now have two former Red Bull drivers driving for Toro Rosso. That's not the way this ladder system's supposed to work. I want to look at another Toro Rosso Red Bull property, Sebastian Vettel. Where has his mojo gone, and can it ever be recovered?
Very, very good question. I think part of it is he, again, is a very private person. He's got this girlfriend, and they've got two little children. And I just wondering whether, in fact, what's he got? He's probably worth, 300 or 400 million? And he's just thinking, is it really worth it? The car obviously doesn't suit him terribly well. And one of the best things that ever happened to him is to drive for Adrian Newey. In as much as when he drove for Adrian is just an uncanny guy. And he could talk to Vettel. And he designed the cars so that Vettel could drive them, which is what pushed Webber down and out in the end. The first year, Webber was right up there with Vettel. Vettel was going to be the golden boy, and the car changed subtly to suit Vettel. And suddenly Vettel is streets ahead of Webber. Some of that would be gaining experience. and some of it would be Webber getting a bit older. But I think a lot of it was Adrian Newey being able to design the car to suit Vettel. And I don't think there's anybody at Ferrari that can particularly design the car to suit Vettel, whereas it does seem to suit Charles Leclerc, who again has been an incredible, incredible sort of find this year. I mean, everybody knew he was going to be good, and we all said in the winter, "Boy, he's going to give old Vettel some heartache, and that'll have to put him on his toes." And it has. I mean, he's out-qualified in the last 5 races. So Vettel has got to buck his ideas up. And I don't know. I just sometimes wonder if he really wants to. People talk about him retiring. I don't think he'll retire at the end of this year.
Red Bull reunion?
Well,
they could be in need.
I don't think he'd want to go back to drive with Verstappen, because I think Verstappen would clean his clock too. I know that Vettel is a 4-time world champion, but he too was very lucky to beat Alonso in 2010 and in 2012. 2010 was his first championship at Abu Dhabi. If you remember that cock up with the
covering the wrong car. And the first time that Vettel led the world championship was the bloody end of the race. He didn't even know it. He crossed the line thinking he had just completed a solid season, and then that radio transmission of "Nice drive, Seb. By the way, you're world champion." I still get chills thinking about what will forever be in my mind the Vitaly Petrov race with Alonso bottled up behind him.
Yeah, I mean, it was just too awesome or awful to contemplate. And then in 2012, Alonso got taken out corner 1 by Grosjean at Spa and by Raikkonen first lap, first corner in Japan. And if he hadn't been taken out there, he'd have won the championship again. But so Vettel was a bit lucky. And of course, you could never forget his words after he won his 4th world championship. Just remember, guys, things aren't always going to be this way. And sure enough, next year of hybrids, and Ricciardo took to the new idea like a duck to water and consistently beat Vettel. And Vettel left because he didn't like Ricciardo breathing down his neck. So I'm not sure whether he would go back to Red Bull with Verstappen as now the de facto team leader. I mean, Verstappen might win the world championship this year. Could do.
It would take some doing on Lewis and Mercedes' part, but he certainly
it would take a bit of doing. Yeah,
he's got future champion written all over him, and there's no doubt about that. And it's kind of he's the black hole at the center of F1, and everything is revolving around how do you handle the force that is and is going to be Max Verstappen for the future. David, it's been lovely catching up with you. I'm going to put you on the spot for one last question.
Uh-oh.
I've always said if I come into some money that I can just absolutely burn through, I would pay David Hobbs to come to my house and watch F1 with me over gin and tonics. What's the asking price per week, just so I can budget, if that ever comes true?
Lots of gin and tonic. Oh, gosh. I don't have an asking price. That's maybe because I wasn't a prick enough. So. I don't know. I'd come and do it for free.
I may take you up on that someday. I stumbled upon your book this time last year when I came upon your son, Guy, who was selling them outside of the world-famous watering hole in Wisconsin, Siebkens. And if anyone listening has been persuaded by this conversation to go buy this book, what is the best way to get a copy, David?
Well, quite honestly, the best way is on Amazon. It's the cheapest price. Or you can go to Hobbo Book, Hobbo book, one word, at davidhobbs.com, and you can get a signed copy from me, and signed and dedicated. So Hobbo Book at davidhobbs.com, and you can get a signed book that way. But it will cost you a bit more than buying it to Amazon. But just to mention Guy again, as you know, the book's called Hobbo, Motor Racer to Motor Mouth. which took a bit of getting the publishers to agree to. Guy wanted to call it gas pedal to gas bag, but the publisher balked at that one. So that was a bit too much. So.
Well, it makes a great gift. Buy a handful. Thank you, as always, for the time. It's been a joy catching up, David.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. I've enjoyed the hour immensely. So we'll talk to you again. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. We've got Road America is coming up for the Xfinity Series. It's a bit of a light schedule as we're in the throes of the summer break for Formula One. Really, the only snobby racing that we've got on the docket for this weekend is IndyCar at Pocono. So please make sure you tune into that, and we'll have all the action next week on American Racing Snobs.